welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we are continuing our discussion on Women of Light by Kali Fajardo-Anstine. In this episode, we will be discussing the second half of the novel.
Perfect. Well, we are going to be discussing the second half of the novel, but there were a couple things from the first half that we wanted to go over. So we'll just really quickly mention a couple things and then move on to the second half, if that's all right with y'all.
I'm cool with it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Yeah. I had page 90, chapter 11. We should all be happy as kings. And, we think of this is the library scene. We think of libraries, of course, as like a refuge and, the last safe haven when society falls, etc.
Damn. That's how we're going to start.
Yeah, every time. That's what I think.
Back, everybody.
Welcoming. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
But here we get the subversion of that by Kali, where we get this moment of hate and racism, where Luz here is looking for work, and so she's looking for the community board, and then the librarian there turns her down, and so she right away is ostracized, and the librarian, one of the other librarians says, "It's not in Spanish," blurted the other librarian, who now stood beside the man, fixing the thin belt around her lilac sweater. She'd spoken as if delivering a Sunday sermon. And there, Luz thinks, "I'm speaking to you in English, ain't I?" And to those of us here in the border, I think this moment resonates a lot with the kind of the contact zones, right? To put it in Marie-Louise Pratz's concepts of how these encounters with people of other races can really turn ugly. For something as simple as like just looking for work. And, she notes that like there's no libraries in my neighborhood. And, when she's told, well, go to your neighborhood, right? And so it kind of just is a really poignant moment of the segregation of the time and of how, people who were seeking an education, seeking a job opportunity were being turned away and just it's kind of like nowadays like with Karens in a way.
And then just like in speaking of like Karens and things, like the ignorance behind a lot of comments that are being made, like and Luz points that out when she says like, well, I'm speaking English, like obviously like I can speak the language, and so there's always like those comments of go back to your country, like, but I'm American. And there's another part in the novel where they call her American, and she's like, she thinks it just sounds funny because she never thought of herself that way, but she is American.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because she was told she's Mexican, or because she feels and identifies that way. And a lot of other times it's just because she's been shunned by white Americans. So yeah, I think that also comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
With that scene. And yeah, that part where she says, the woman says, we have our own people who need jobs. I suggest you try your own neighborhood, but my neighborhood doesn't have a library. Luz thought this, but didn't say it, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had more than she did.
Wow.
Right. So like just the disparities and in segregation, as you mentioned, Jorge.
And I know that some might think of it as just like microaggressions, but I think the term kind of, I try to shy away from more, because micro kind of makes it seem like it's almost innocuous, But it is like, it can be traumatizing. And that's why I said like those of us in the border can relate. Me, I think I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I would cross through Juarez and cross back, like this was the reality of, CBP and Border Patrol that make you think like you can't speak English. And of course, it becomes ironic because three of us here teach it, and so yeah, this moment really hit hard, and there's of course the irony, right, of it being librarian who does this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good section. I'm glad we revisited that instead of skipping
Yeah.
over it.
Mm-hmm.
Because then there are a lot of echoes that we still see to the present day, right? The taking our jobs or that concern, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all the book bans, right? And kind
Other types of Karens trying to silence our stories and
of, oh, that's not for you.
Mm-hmm.
Gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Where they make you feel like you don't belong.
Yeah, so I thought that was important to show that like racism wasn't restricted to like, the more like uncultured part of town, right? That it was even like amongst the elite that you would see that. I don't think we talked about Abel, right? Because we talked about David.
right.
What did you guys make of Abel in the first half?
Well, Abel is a musician. He plays trumpet. Um, he likes Luz, and they're kind of seeing each other in the first half of the book, and then later on it becomes more serious. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like Abel is there, but he's not. To me, at least, he wasn't contributing. He was just like a background character.
Mm-hmm.
Until the very end, right? But
I feel like a lot of that has to do with the dialogue that they have. So a lot of the time he's asking her questions about like who she is and where she's from and what she does. And she does. I don't feel like she really asks the questions back to him.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we don't get a lot of his background, do we? Other than him,
Than his work.
his work,
right?
Mm-hmm.
and how he feels about Lou. So he's kind of like the Ken to her Barbie.
Yeah, some people might say that.
What did you think about Abel, Jorge?
Yeah, I mean, he's like, the working class, love interest, and as opposed to like David, right, where it's a work, it's an unequal relationship, right, because he's the boss. Um, yeah.
Could possibly be a better fit for her in the context, but
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
maybe. I mean, because I think it's the 30s, 1930s. One of the things that they're talking about is like marriage, as a almost like a necessity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And back then, they would marry like in
Yeah.
their teens, and yeah.
But I also feel like Abel was more supportive of Luz and who she is.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas David, I feel like, was more so trying to tell her how to be better. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like even when they went to like the open mic, he's like, "Oh, you have a customer," and he's like, "Okay, I'll be back."
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the developing contrasts between David and Abel. And why I think eventually, like she does kind of lean toward more Abel than David.
Until she doesn't.
yeah, that wedding
Dun,
stuff
dun.
was like, whoa, what?
I was like, don't do it, Luz.
It's also, yeah, she's 17. Like, it's that thing we don't know sometimes, like her mistakes, and I mean, that's this very end of the book.
Yeah, which just goes back to like showing how this dude really is a piece of work, because he's a grown man and preying on this young girl.
Yeah, in the first episode we mentioned it, but I guess we mentioned it again the show before the show, our pre-show discussion, right? I did remember a scene later on where they're 10, Luce and Lisette are 10 playing with chalk, doing hopscotch, and David comes out to have a smoke, and like I guess reading that scene, right? I think it was around the same time at like the wedding in the book. I can't remember if it's before or after, but in that context, I was remembering that like getting caught in the washroom.
Yeah. So he is significantly older and just makes it that much more.
And plus, it seems like there's like it's already like a culture of like womanizers in that a little bit.
Yeah, they do talk about that in the dinner scene, which is what I kind of wanted to bring up from the first half of the book. Just really quickly, that dinner scene where he, I guess she stays late or something. He's like, well, just come to dinner with me. And it seems, innocent enough, but of course it isn't. And he takes her to like this really elite club, and it's obviously his people. She feels very out of place. Um, and she's noticing all of these things and how people talk about Mexicans and stuff, just like right in front of her.
Like she's not there.
Like she's not even there. And when they do speak to her, it's like, oh, very in a sexualized way, talking about Mexican women and calling her doll and things like that. So, in one of the
Sorry, it's disgusting. Like
sorry.
in one part, I think when she goes to the bathroom or something, or someone from her table, another woman's like, "Oh, are you the current girl?" or something like that, So bringing back that whole womanizer thing, that David isn't, just this innocent guy, and someone who obviously gave her a job. She asked him for it, yes, but all these things kind of happening after the fact really show how easily she was kind of taken advantage of, and because of her circumstances, like there was no other way. Like she tried going another route, finding another job, but
you have that power dynamic that
yeah,
really makes it on top of all the other things, right?
And I also saw that scene as emblematic of the imperial gaze that you're talking about, how they were kind of like leering and the idea that like in that kind of like context, the white men do have all the power. They do have the power to objectify and like kind of just see the woman as like disposable, right? But yeah, that was important.
yeah, that scene really sticks out to me. Kind of similar to how the library scene sticks out to you, Jorge. For similar reasons of like things I've come across in my own life. I'm sure you have too, Vanessa. As women, but yeah, there's some really great ways that Kali describes like the men and like just how disgusting they are, and like she says one of them she feels like his spit on her cheek, and it's just like these gross things like that. I'm like reading it and I'm like so angry and also like disgusted. It's really these really great details that she includes in that part that make me really picture the scene and resonate with it.
Yeah, very visceral reaction to that. Like, I mean, I couldn't help myself even right now. I'm just going like, yeah, like, ugh.
Yeah, as you should.
Yeah.
But I think those were, I mean, unless you all had other things to finish wrapping up part one. Or, sorry, the first two parts, because there's 4 parts in the novel. So the first half.
So another, I guess, like explosive thing that happens that we can point to being based off of an actual events, but also echoed in things that's still happening. We talked about it briefly. You have like the wrongful death that happens in here that David's firm is looking at. Esteban, right? Yeah. Which Esteban Ruiz, which I mentioned, it's the police, one of their one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot lately too, after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, just excessive force, like what, and again now it's tied in here. It's maybe more obviously tied into like the race too, racial equivalent,
Yeah.
um, and kind of the fallout of that too, like the Ku Klux Klan's insertion as well, their presence in Denver, which again we talked about Black Klansmen earlier. They've had that presence.
And I was remembering the Hate You Give too.
Yes, like
Yeah.
the fights, the protesters, right? You have
Mhm.
that.
The court, like whether there's going to be a grand jury discussion.
A lot in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and talking about the march, there's that one scene where Luz is in the office with David, and they have to kind of shelter in place because the march is happening right in front of the office. And yeah, it's very present. It's very prevalent there. And that scene's also very messed up. Yeah, because that's when David first tries to take advantage of her, and it's such a weird time and place to do it. Like she's terrified for her life, and rightfully so. But he's, of course, not thinking about anything like that. Like, I guess also kind of showing like the privilege and on his end.
Mm-hmm.
In part 3, we also get the scene in the nunnery. Is that what it's called?
To the nunnery. We didn't even talk about the epigraphs in part 1.
We did. Oh, the
just because the Tempest. I was thinking about that Shakespeare. Get thee to the nunnery. Anyway, sorry.
We can go back to that. Remember we're using Kali's structure.
Let's pass this prologue. All right, sorry. But you were making a point about the nunnery though first.
Yeah. Well, this is where it becomes like a novela to me. Like in parts 3 and 4 of the novel, it's like, oh snap! Like there's Eleanor Ann again, and she is pregnant, but she's at the nunnery hiding out. So like, Lizette finds her. They're seamstresses, and so she's delivering some slips to them. I think is what they are. Like what are those called? Are they called slips?
Like, yeah.
Anyway, she's delivering those to the nunnery, and then she sees Eleanor Ann there, and it's a bunch of other pregnant girls. I guess that they just send there, So that's how we find out that she is pregnant. So yeah, that's one of the things, and of course, there's other things that just like happen, like plot twists and stuff. But that happens in part 3.
Mm-hmm. And that was right after Sarah and Maria Josie were born. Because again, there's a lot of like back and forth, right, in the timeline. And I don't know if this is a one sacred timeline, but there's only more than one timeline to consider. And maybe going back to what you said, Reina, about how it can be a little confusing. But I think, it's the idea of like the memories, going back to the memories. And this is the way that minds work anyway. But I thought that birth scene on 202 was interesting because we get the connection of Sarah to like, she has the clairvoyant abilities and, that kind of something that is passed on to Luz, right? And the ceremony itself, is quite beautiful. It says, during the blessing, a curandero named Raul wrapped Pidre and Simodeca in a woven blanket, blue lightning and red mountains across their backs. Inside the blanket's cave, through pinpricks of glowing light, Pidre gazed upward and cradled Simodeca's face in his hands. He smelled of summertime at night, the sweetness after rain. Her cheeks balled with happiness. Pidre placed his palms on her belly and smoothed the lacy fabric. Simodeca didn't tell Pidre, but in that moment she felt as if they had married, and she thought to herself that if Wiley were to meet her again in the afterlife, she hoped he wouldn't feel betrayed. So so Sarah is born first, and then Maria Josie a year later. And I thought, this was an interesting little side plot, right, of Maria Josie and Sarah growing up. and ultimately the fatal demise of Pidre. But it goes back right to the sleepy prophet again, and birth, and the cycle begins anew, and it's almost like there has to be someone there to stop that cycle. If anyone knows the Ahsoka reference there.
That's the second time you bring up Ahsoka.
A lot of Star Wars in these
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, and then chapter 26 is the storm, the shelter from the storm scene that you were talking about. What did you guys make of Ethel with Maria Josie and their relationship?
Well, we do get in the beginning of I don't know now. I don't know if it's the beginning of the novel or if it's at some other point, but they did talk about Maria Josie preferring the company of women. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's also kind of a nice thing to see, and
Yeah.
And that's
again, like showing how a lot of the women here felt they needed to depend on men, and so we have Maria Josie, who's more of like self-reliant and independent and that kind of thing.
and Ethel that's the one, that's the scene we looked at already, right? Where like she talks about intelligence.
Yeah,
Doesn't
that's
just come from books, so that's kind of also going along with that theme. Like
Yeah.
it's not just men, but also like non-traditional like ways of looking at. You don't have to be book read or have a degree to be considered intelligent, right? Comes from just survival, like you said, Raina. Yeah, that's Ethel, right? Who says that?
And throughout this time, Diego has been writing to Luz, and so I don't know about you guys, but that really brought to mind Sunny's Blues. One of my favorite short stories where you do get the sibling here, epistolary communication, and so it harkens back to those times where, of course, people did have to wait for the letters to arrive, and etc. And kind of but I don't know, maybe this is one gripe that I have about the work, is that I kind of would have I mean, I see the value of like seeing it from Luz's perspective, but I kind of wanted to go in there because we get maybe one or two scenes where like we see they go in the fields, but other than that, he's kind of he becomes this background character. But I felt I kind of wanted more of Diego, and
well, the book is called Women of Light. Okay. No, I agree, especially because knowing that he's like a snake charmer, and then these little pieces in the in his letters where he's like, "Oh, I got another snake, Sirena," and so we're like, "Ooh, that's pretty cool." And yeah, like the sacrifices that he had to make were kind of just like snippets that we get. I agree. Yeah. And with a lot of these characters, I mean, it's cool because we get so many characters and we see how they all intertwine. But at the same time, it's really hard to develop all of their stories fully in a way that maybe readers might want,
Or that are satisfying probably for
or
everyone.
that are satisfying.
I think that's what a lot of people like. I mean, I'm always curious when we do these, and I'll go to Goodreads and I'll see people's things, and a lot of people had some comments similar to that, right? Like, oh, I would have loved to seen what happened more of Lucia and like more of those family members of the past, and Diego. I would have more Diego.
Yeah.
It's like life, we only get a little bit of it.
I guess the effect for us readers is that we kind of feel more like Luz, right? Where she is detached from her brother. And you see that effect it has on her.
Yeah, if we felt this way, imagine how Luz felt, wanting more Diego.
Should we get to part 4, 245 onward?
Also, you mentioned Abel, what we thought about him. I just remembered right now when I think they have their first kiss at the club, and she's startled, and so she kind of has like a gasp, and Abel thinks it's because of him, right? Which I thought was kind of funny, and he moves kind of fast, right? Wants to marry her, and
Yeah.
there's also that where I think she just doesn't really know what she wants yet. Someone,
A gasp.
which way I think the end. Well, I don't want to get to the ending yet, but
Yeah.
could get there. We'll get there.
That's funny. That reminds me a little bit of the story of an hour.
Hmm.
The ending of Kate Chopin's story where she's there. Well, she obviously dies because she's shocked that her husband is alive and she thought the whole time he was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And the last line is like, the doctor saying she died of a thrill that kills or something like that. Is that something like that? But
Yeah.
obviously it's like, no, that's
Yeah.
not why she wasn't dying because she was happy that he was alive. She was shocked,
Yeah.
that her husband came back. So it's kind of like that, like
Yeah.
this poor Abed was like, oh, she is so she's gasping because I kissed her.
I left her
Like,
breathless.
no, you're just like you're in my space, dude.
Yeah, I can't remember something. It
Whoa.
was something else shocked her. It was something like different, like the external to them. And she was like, and he was
It
like,
was
damn, I'm good.
It was the fish.
Oh, it's the trout. Yes, it jumped up and hit a rock. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that's such a funny commentary too on that. Like, damn, I'm good.
The fish. Wait a minute.
Part 4.
Yeah. So part 4 starts with the Simonekis final shot.
Simon Osea.
Simo de sea.
Simo Desea. Yeah, I keep mispronouncing it.
Simos.
Simo.
Yes.
And so we get the
difficult name.
the colonizer scene that I felt was one of the most vivid scenes where you find that like Mickey kind of pulled one over Pidre, right? And so they lost everything, the deed, etc. And very common, of course, with the way that the colonizers would work. And so this harkens back to like again the westward expansion and how there was a lot of that encroachment upon indigenous land and to mine the resources, right? Like this is what it started with is the Anglos built smelters in a matter of weeks, we're told, on 245, and we get the radium element, which is, if you guys have seen there's a great movie called Radium Girls about how in Britain, they were making this into watches, and it's of course radioactive, and they ultimately discover that like it has these effects. But anyway, so aside from the environmental impact, I felt on 251 like I marked this as a kind of one of those Western passages. The 44 caliber bullet had entered his neck and carved into his throat. Profuse sprays of blood had rained over his body and land. Simoteca put her hands to the gaping black hole, felt her husband's swampy shallows on her fingertips. She held them there, searching for a way to patch her love back together. She removed her shawl, forced the threads into Pidre's destroyed airway. But as she pushed harder and firmer, it was clear that his life force, his inner self, his soul, was gone. With no beating heart, his body was an emptied and desecrated house. Simodica used the sleeve of her dress to wipe blood from Pidre's open eyes. She closed them and wailed, as if to destroy this reality with the force of her emotions. The brutal violence that we get to witness here with Pidre, and the way that Simo is ultimately helpless, despite her being this sharpshooter, right? She isn't able to do enough, and is forced to have the girls run for their own safety.
Yeah, I mean, and that's reminiscent of Maria Josie telling Diego to run for his own safety. Yeah, this whole scene was really brutal, and just showing like, I mean, by that time it was too late, but she was still able to shoot those 3 men with 3 shots, and it shows that she's even though she was wanting to save her husband, the fourth shot was at the sky as if to God, right? As if to shoot into God, it says. So just like the feeling behind that, like she didn't want to do it. It's just, again, like survival. And in the case of the girls, it's just, their way of surviving is by running.
Yeah.
And then chapter 30 begins with Sarah and Maria Josie. Now, this is some years later, right? And so I marked here, there's an interesting transition from the Anglo colonizers to the Spanish ones with the Catholic Church here in Saguarita. And we're told Maria Josie was housed by a land grant family named Trujillo, who had laid claim to the land for nearly 150 years. Some distant grandfather, a direct descent of Juan de Oñate. And I don't know if you guys heard, but I think it was yesterday or the day before that there was a rally somewhere in a town in New Mexico. I forget the name. And so there was the Juan de Oñate statue where they were going to hold it. And someone, who was wearing a MAGA hat ended up firing.
The Latino last name.
Yeah.
It was like Fernandez or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is like why books like Kali's are so important, because they can really bring to the table the conversations that are worth having and that we get in history and history repeating itself. And also the history that we're not told or that was told the wrong way, because we grew up hearing that, of course, like colonization was for the best and that, America is the greatest country, etc. Right?
With the Oñate statue. That's right. Oh, it's Martinez. David Martin.
It was in Española.
Española, yeah. Yeah, I was just looking it up right now, too. Dude's last name is Martinez. Wearing a MAGA hat.
And he's 23. And so that's so sad. I mean, for so many reasons, but again, just the importance of reading these stories and going to libraries and, not believing everything that's fed to you. Because this kid, and he is a kid, has so much hate already. And yeah, it's just the irony of it, where it was that happened and the protests. And yeah, it's so sad.
Yeah.
And right as we're reading this too, it just like all came together. Yeah, this chapter is really the parallels but also like the differences, and like now we're kind of shifting a new point in history, different colonizers. And here we have Maria Josefina, right, who throughout most of the novel is known as Maria Josie because that's how they call her at work. Probably because they can't pronounce Josefina, which is why it's hard for us to pronounce Simo de Sea. But we try every time because we should. But a lot of other times it's like, and I'm, I do this a lot too when I introduce myself as Reina a lot of times. But it's important to again come back to our roots, even if it's something as quote unquote simple as just pronounce my name correctly.
I've actually started fighting with students on this in the sense that they're like, no, just call me this. I'm like,
what's your name, dude?
No, what's your name? Yeah. Well, yeah, because like I'm like, you probably get used to your whole life, like people are like, oh, I'm just gonna call you this, so they just like accept it, and I'm like, no, do you want? I'll call you by your name,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That comes up a lot, huh?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we get a lot of the conversations between Maria Josefina or Maria Josie and Sarah in like, what are they going to do? Like, how do they get out of Saguarita, which is also a lot of a very recurring theme in a lot of these stories that we're reading, like
Mm-hmm.
to improve their lives. A lot of the stories that we see here on the border, like, oh, kids just wanting to get out of El Paso, there's nothing here for them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of like relatable too, and feeling stuck. And so I think Sarah is the one who gets pregnant, right, with Benny's children, who we find out are Diego and Luz. But she's kind of like that character that feels okay leaning into that role, right? Of, well, this is my destiny kind of thing. This is fate. Like, isn't this what all women are meant to do? Be mothers,
Right.
care after their husbands. And Maria Josie's kind of like more progressive, like, no, F that.
And then Lizette marries Alfonso, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole wedding scene.
Which one? Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's the other kind of parallel. And like Lizette and Luz also had that connection. And Luz was kind of like, well, why can't we just be happy by ourselves? Why do we have to find the love of our lives? Because they were like seeing how their neighbors or other family members, like husbands, were beating up on their wives. And like, when we find the loves of our lives, we have to make sure they treat us right. And so there's like that difference between them two, like just like with Sada and Maria Josie, I think. But yeah, I think that also kind of shows empowerment that Vanessa was talking about earlier. About these women and breaking these generational, I guess it would be traumas, right? If
Maybe societal expectations of like what, so kind of breaking out of that norm. I guess being unconventional.
Yeah.
But like wanting to find your own way, which I think kind of Luce is about after this whole situation here, where she's caught, with the other, which is a rough scene. But I think it's after all this where I think she really finds the importance of family, right? And I guess kind of like being there for each other and supporting one, like kind of like sharing their stories so they move on, live on. She's gonna make sure of it.
Yeah. Even and especially the traumatic parts, because those are the ones we grow from, right? It's not just sugarcoating any of what happened, but that way, if some of these things happen again, which they will, we'll know how to tackle them. I had a question about Maria Josie when she's in chapter 31, an animal named Night.
What page?
262. When she's walking, she's trying to get a ride to Denver, and then this woman picks her up, takes her to the ranch. You guys remember that part?
Yeah.
So she was pregnant too? Is that when because she has like blood on her, and then the woman Millicent draws a bath for her, and then on page 267, she worked the sides of her belly with ivory soap. She listened to the ding sticks of the house, blah, 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 blah. You're not carrying anymore, are you? And then Maria Josie dropped her hands from her breast to her belly. The father? Maria Josie watched the black dog, how its tail coiled like a snail shell. Hauenstein, he's a German man, a doctor. So that was my question, I guess, because it was it wasn't really talked about, or maybe it was and I missed it.
She had a stillborn, right?
Yeah, that might have been it.
Yeah.
Isn't that even mentioned in the generational map at the very beginning of the book? Maria Josie's son, Bobby Lenore, stillborn.
Oh.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, that was my question. Yeah, it just seemed, I don't know if it seemed just out of place to me, like reading that. I'm like, wait a minute, what happened here? And
Right.
she's like going to Denver. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very subtle.
Yeah, and then chapter 32 is the wedding. Lots happens in the wedding.
All I know is I underlined this line because I thought it was awesome. By the way, we didn't really talked about her prose a lot. She has some very great imagery all throughout. You know, like the prose.
Yeah.
I just love I love this sentence. The night sky was a backdrop of stars erupting in mariachi. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
But one of those mariachis is Abel, right?
Dun, dun,
They have a nice little moment, you know, alone. They sneak off and they get caught. Right.
See, this is where I feel like it's like a novela, you know?
Yes.
They're in the laundry room, and then
And inexplicably, she ends up with David, and she
and the laundry
commits to him.
room also.
Same place. It's like, oh,
I know. Oh, Luz. Yeah, and gets caught by Abel.
pretty compromising.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, that's the end of that. Well, no.
Or is it?
Abel has a pretty interesting response too, I would say.
Yeah.
Guess it wasn't that more dramatic of a wedding because it still went on, and Lucette didn't even know, right? She had to keep asking her. It was until I guess the next day or a little after that.
I mean, she did find her crying, but
And she but then she's like, "What happened?" And she didn't really tell her.
Yeah.
At least that night.
Yeah. And then chapter 33, El Mariachi. Speaking of mariachis. Yeah, what was his response, Richie? His response
Some people just want to watch the world burn.
Yeah, his
toxic
response to
too.
her was like, "Give me my ring back." And then after that, he's like, "That wasn't enough."
Yeah. He kind of commits a little light arson.
Light.
Light.
Get it? Ha.
Woman of light, also. Man of light.
Yeah, he responds pretty. I mean, that's not a pretty good response, I would say. Still,
Reasonable? No. Understanding, I guess, because he always had a bad feeling about David too. He's like, I don't like that David does this, or that he's very protective of Luce in that way, from David. So he knew he was kind of like trash.
And that's
so of course this made him more mad that it was him.
Yeah.
She was like cheating on him with.
Is that like that typical thing in a relationship? Like, that he's just a friend.
Who hurt you, Richie?
Wait, no. We're done with this. No. I just got sent into the shadow realm. Peace.
Just kidding. I interrupted you, Jorge.
No. Yeah, just the counterbalance, right? The foil and one of the redeemable qualities in Abel. But yeah, I mean at that point, I thought, I kind of did like that about the progression of the plot was that Luz ultimately didn't end up with either of them.
Yeah.
So, and then we do get the chapter after that, Women of Light. So on 296, it takes us back to Luz's origins and abilities of the so-called tasiography. She's able to not just reading the tea leaves, but beyond that, right? That it isn't just kind of like this circus act, right? That it's something that is innate and then almost independent of just reading the leaves. Is that she has that ability, and again, going back to Sarah and her ancestry.
I like how a reminder is hearing Estevan's sister Celia speak at a protest, once again demanding justice for his unjust murder. And she talks about the importance of her family, and I think it really, in amidst all this other like you said, the novella romance drama, you have this moment where she's like, you know what, it's about family, which sets the stage for a return. What do you think?
That was me gasping.
Return of the King? Return of a Jedi? Return of
Wait.
what?
No more Star Wars.
Well, one was also Lord of the Rings.
Rings. Get it right.
Oh, I did say Jedi too.
First of all,
First of all, nerds.
We're nerds, yeah. I was like, first of all, nerds. Return of the Boom Bap? Return of the
Return of the
Mac?
Mac.
No, let's say Diego for now.
and now let's dance it out.
Now I have to hear that song. Yeah, Diego's return. So we were talking about the bookends and that happen, and so the beginning of the novel starts with Diego after the prologue, Diego having to leave, and so the final chapter is Diego's return after Luz pleads for him to come back, and
Lucille.
we do get Lucille. Who's Lucille?
Next generation.
Yeah.
Mhm. Next gen.
Did you want to read that bookend line?
Which part? The last paragraph?
Yeah.
Okay, the last two paragraphs. Yeah, okay. So this is after Diego he has his daughter with him, kisses his daughter and hands the baby to Luz in the back seat. We'll call her Lucille, he said to his sister. Now go on, tell her our stories. Luz nodded and began to think of what she would tell her niece. She would start, she decided, with a woman she had seen in her dreams, a sleepy prophet.
That's
The
good.
sleepy prophet.
I really like that.
Yeah.
But then it also goes back to like she saw this woman in her dreams, and that was something that actually happened generations before. So just like her really cool visions that she has that
Yeah.
again transcend the tea leaves thing that what I was talking
Like a Jedi, just
about.
yeah.
Whatever.
But I feel like we should have a disclaimer before these podcasts, like warning, too many pop culture references, including Star Wars. Anyway,
Spoilers. Yeah, like overall thoughts and closing thoughts.
storytelling is where it's at, right? I always appreciate books that do that. Emphasize how. I mean, I guess is it? I know a lot of people don't like that. I personally do, like just stories about storytelling. And how important it
It's
is.
too meta. Is that why people
Maybe,
don't?
yeah, I don't get it. Yeah, that's cool. Like they are important,
Yeah.
not to convince me, but I enjoyed this read.
Yeah, I liked it too.
I enjoyed it the second time around a lot more. For me, like I said at the beginning of part one, it was just about like being consistent with reading it because there is a lot there. And I think that it does a disservice to Kali and all of the work that she put into it if we just read it in parts or like set it aside or read something else simultaneously. It's like really put the time into the novel.
Because the whole cohesive thing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely not a beach read, And why I was saying, like, for those of you who might want to teach it, bring in those links that Richie mentions are in the paperback, and maybe supplement it with like some Chicanx history, black black history, civil rights era, and you really do get a stronger picture of what happened with Luz.
So yeah, there are discussion questions, and so if you want to incorporate this classroom, I'm gonna actually share one. Number 3, I think, is a good one. It could be a really good activity to share with your students. It asks, how does the novel address the importance of storytelling? How do you think we inherit the stories of our ancestors, and what power do these stories do they hold over us? If you are comfortable with it, share a story about one of your ancestors and discuss the ways it influenced your life.
Mm.
It'd be a cool little writing
Yeah.
exercise and sharing.
That so before I started reading this for a second time, I was reading Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo, and that book is really similar in in that she's also bringing in her ancestors' stories, and it's a really cool premise because this woman is wanting to have a living wake. Have you all read this book yet?
No.
No. So she's not dying or anything, but she she wants to have a living wake so that people can celebrate her while she's alive. So I think that's really cool, and it's all kind of like leading up to the wake and stuff. But I was listening to an interview that Acevedo was giving, and she was talking about that, like how it was hard for her to write a bunch of these stories with, or when she was younger, to ask those kinds of questions to her elders, and like she didn't know she was going to want to know these stories later or want to write about them.
Yeah.
And the importance of just listening and asking questions and getting those stories and passing them on, you know. So shout out to Elizabeth Acevedo too.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I'm excited to jump back into that one now that I've finished this one again to see how it relates.
It's a novel.
It's a novel.
Yeah.
Yes. Family Lore.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this one was really cool. Yeah, it can get a bit confusing, just timeline wise. But I think once you get the hang of it and hang of the characters' names and stuff, it's easier to follow.
Yeah.
And it has gotten recently, like I've been hearing about some like award recognition. Like I think it won the Reading the West award. It was a finalist for some other award. One that was named after like Willa Cather, who's another Western writer. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Congratulations, Kali.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a chance to talk to her. Well,
Yeah, actually, so the last thing to tell readers is if you listen to this, you might be able to take advantage of Kali's visit here to El Paso on October 9th. And so we're very excited to be able to host her here for the first time and get her to meet some of our students. And also, if you're listening, we're going to be giving away free copies of Women of Light and then also Sabrina and Karina. So if you all can make it, and if not, then maybe you can watch the recording when we share the link.
Alrighty then. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, recorded at Power at the Past and brought to you by Border Census. This episode, we continued our discussion on Women of Light by Kali Fajardo-Anstine. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Join us on our next episode and follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep.